Hey everybody, Jason Burmis here. And there's a new New York Times article out there that is going really in depth into the transhumanist and eugenics connections of Jeffrey Epstein. And normally I'm very critical of the publication, and I will remain to be so. And by the way, I would say that we have to look for some red herrings here. But overall, this was a really interesting article, and we're going to read it all the way down the line, giving commentary through it. But first, I want to go over some of the past tech connections that we've made and eugenics, AI type stuff that Jeffrey Epstein's been involved in. And I've said to you, look, this guy bought both sides of politics. He gave money to all sorts of charities. He had politicians around him. However, one of his things was collecting scientists, and we went over that in the Dershowitz deep dive. It was in that Devil's Advocate piece by the New Yorker. We're going to show you that in a minute. But over a week ago now, I remember doing this article that Mark Zuckerberg once met Jeffrey Epstein at a dinner hosted by LinkedIn co-founder Reid Hoffman that Elon Musk also attended. And I believe in the article, it's Elon who actually introduces him, but let's find out. Let's see. He denies the report, but yeah, Vanity 4 reported that Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla and SpaceX, made the introduction, but a spokesperson for Musk denied this. Elon never introduced Jeffrey Epstein to Mark Zuckerberg and does not know either person well enough to do so. I don't know what to believe there. Vanity Fair has been pretty good in their reporting. Again, none of these publications are perfect, but they were all definitely at the party together. So this is the type of person that he surrounds himself in. Now, in that New Yorker article, like I stated before, Epstein used his mansion to establish a salon for scientists. I've known a couple of billionaires in my life. An occasional guest at gatherings there said, they have their hobbies. Jeffries was scientist. He liked to collect them. He also had parties for many of New York's most powerful finance executives and politicians. Bought them off as well. But the science part, I think, is really important. For instance, he's still involved in artificial intelligence. I believe this is 2013, almost the beginning of 2014. But he backed OpenCog AI research. And all of this gets into transcending the human body, eugenics, the singularity, Ray Kurzweil, and really the transformation of what I believe is a conscious being, or conscious beings on this planet that may or may not have souls, depending on what you think they are, to some kind of autonomous copy or replication of us, which is not us. Which is not that consciousness. But, you know, he also had a lot to do in this with kind of like the Fountain of Youth, living forever, cryogenics, right? If you look at that movie, The Fountain, by Darren Aronofsky, it's one of my favorite underground films most people don't remember. But it shows man's pursuit throughout the ages of the tree of life or immortality. You know, nobody really, wants to die, and some people are willing to set out anything to do so. That was a big theme in Prometheus as well, if you saw that picture. So this article is, I wouldn't say it's super short, but like I said, we're going to read the whole thing because there's so many connections here. And, we've talked about, was he brilliant? Was he not brilliant? A lot of people have said that were around him. He was very driven, very smart guy. He would seem to be, especially with the intelligence connections that are now out there, and especially with every interview I've seen with people. Now, in here, there's a couple scientists that suspect he wasn't as smart as he thought he was, but you got to understand, when you're at this level of science, what kind of social cues do you have? And a theme throughout this is, oh, well, we didn't know what his kinks were, and we never imagined his crimes were this horrible. But the truth of the matter, all these people were in line to take money from this guy. So, with that being said, let's kick into this. Jeffrey E. Epstein, the wealthy financier who was accused of sex trafficking, had an unusual dream. He hoped to seed the human race with his DNA by impregnating women at his vast New Mexico ranch. That's just the beginning, folks. In fact, it later goes on in this article that one of the scientists believed that he was having these parties in part to bring very bright, intellectual young women in to see if they were candidates for this process. And he was talking about having 20 women at a time impregnated at the same time. And he was also obsessed with altering genetics, etc., etc., etc. Mr. Epstein, over the years, confided to scientists and others about his scheme, according to 4 people familiar with his thinking, although there is no evidence that it ever came to fruition. But they'll later go on to say that in no way would have this been illegal, okay? Mr. Epstein's vision reflected his long-standing fascination, what has become known as transhumanism. The science of improving the human population through technologies like genetic engineering and artificial intelligence. We showed you the OpenCog link. We just showed you the possible Elon Musk link. Remember, Elon Musk is now asking people for trials where they will have 4 holes drilled into their skull and a Bluetooth device attached to their brain so they could interface with a computer. That's transhumanism. Critics have likened transhumanism to modern-day version of eugenics. The discredited field of improving the human race through controlled breeding. Mr. Epstein, who was charged in July with the sexual trafficking of girls as young as 14 with a serial illusionist, He lied about the identities of his clients, his wealth, his financial prowess, his personal achievements, but he managed to use connections and charisma to cultivate valuable relationships with business and political leaders. Well, again, if he's an intelligence officer of the highest levels, it totally makes sense. He's got his fingers in everything. He can seed fund things, etc., etc., etc. Interviews with more than a dozen of his acquaintances, as well as public documents, show that he used the same tactics to insinuate himself into an elite scientific community, thus allowing him to pursue his interests in eugenics and other fringe fields like cryogenics. Lawyers for Mr. Epstein, who has pleaded not guilty to the sex trafficking charges, did not respond to requests for comment. Mr. Epstein attracted a glittering array of prominent scientists. They included the Nobel Prize-winning physicist Murray Gell-Mann, who discovered the quark, the theoretical physicist and best-selling author Stephen Hawking, the paleontologist and evolutionary biologist Stephen Jay Gould, Oliver Sacks, the neurologist and best-selling author George M. Church, a molecular engineer who has worked to identify genes that could be altered to create superior humans, and the MIT theoretical physicist Frank Wilczek, a Nobel laureate. And by the way, the names just keep coming. They keep coming. This article's got a ton of different names. The lure for some of the scientists was Epstein's money. No kidding. Probably the vast majority of the scientists, I would say. He dangled financing for their pet projects. Some of the scientists said that their prospect of financing blinded them to the seriousness of his sexual transgressions. No kidding. And even led them to give credence to some of Mr. Epstein's half-baked scientific musings. Scientists gathered at dinner parties at Mr. Epstein's Manhattan mansion, where Dom Perignon and expensive wines flowed freely, even though Mr. Epstein did not drink. And I want to talk about this for a minute. You know, there's been a lot of talks of his partying and orgies, and you've seen him with Trump and a bunch of cheerleaders. Again, it would make sense with the intelligence connections. You know, people with photographic memories, people in that field, they don't like to inhibit their senses at all. So I'm just saying, if Epstein wasn't drinking, if he wasn't doing drugs, and it seems like he had one hell of a perverse sexual appetite, all of these things are on the table. He hosted buffet lunches at Harvard's program for evolutionary dynamics, which he had helped start with a $6.5 million donation. And what better way, again, to seed fund the Ivy Leagues with intelligence money than through some asset like Epstein? Just throwing that out there. Others flew to conferences sponsored by Mr. Epstein in the United States Virgin Islands and were feted on his private island there. Once, the scientists, including Mr. Hawking, crowded on board a submarine that Mr. Epstein had chartered. The Harvard cognitive psychologist Steven Pinker said he was invited by colleagues, including Martin Nowak, a Harvard professor of mathematics and biology, and theoretical physicist Lawrence Krauss, to salons and coffee clashes at which Mr. Epstein would hold court. While some of Mr. Pinker's peers hailed Mr. Epstein as brilliant, Mr. Pinker described him as an intellectual imposter. Now, here's the thing. We got to take everything this guy says with a grain of salt. He may be shielding himself from whatever. He may not be. He may have had a disdain for Epstein from the beginning. But like I said, also people who are in these fields often, I don't want to say they're, on the spectrum, but their socialization skills may not be there. I don't know how many people out there have been around somebody who's really into science or engineering, et cetera, et cetera. Now, listen, don't get me wrong. I know biologists, computer programmers, engineers. Hell, one of my buddy who is a very, very talented engineer, he quit, and his name is JP Lambiase. You can go check out his 2.2 million subscriber YouTube channel, and I'm in a couple of those videos, by the way. Healthy junk food, spelled with the hell down below. So believe me, there are people that, and he's a comedian too. He's hilarious. Go check that channel out. It's good for your kids too. My nieces love it. But the point being is that, he's connected to Epstein. He's one of the people that talks. He didn't blow the whistle on, the sexual transgressions then when he may have seen some of those things or at least heard about them. So let's just read what he had to say. He would abruptly change the subject, ADD style, dismiss an observation with an adolescent wisecrack, Mr. Pinker said, and he could have taken offense to some of that. Another scientist cultivated by Mr. Epstein, Jaron Lanier, a prolific author who is a founder of virtual reality, said that Mr. Epstein's ideas did not amount to science in that they did not lend themselves to rigorous proof. Mr. Lanier and Mr. Epstein had once hypothesized that atoms behave like investors in a marketplace. But again, when you look at something like that, you can interpret like that all the time. And now that you know about quantum mechanics, and basically the fact that you can have superpositions, the qubits in these quantum computers can be a 0 and a 1, and then have one of these odd entanglements at the same time, superpositions, et cetera, really weird stuff. So who knows? Mr. Lanier said he had declined any funding from Mr. Epstein, that he had met with him only once after Mr. Epstein in 2008 pleaded guilty to charges of soliciting prostitutions from a minor. And this is Pinker right here. So at least we get a look at him, okay? Mr. Epstein was willing to finance research that others viewed as bizarre. He told one scientist that he was bankrolling efforts to identify a mysterious particle that might trigger the feeling that someone is watching you. At one session at Harvard, Epstein criticized efforts to reduce starvation and provide health care to the poor because doing so increased the risk of what? Overpopulation. So let's start getting into it, this eugenics thing. They kind of slide it in there in the beginning, and they'll talk about it later with Dershowitz, but here it is. This is the viewpoint of globalists. And remember, this is a CFR guy. This is a Trilateral Commission guy from 95 to 2008, confirmed at least. And this is the viewpoint. We don't care about the poor and the sick and the hungry. We don't care about the serf class. And that's all of us included. Everybody that's watching this, you're part of that. That's why our healthcare system is out of control. It's by design. It's for profit. It's not to benefit us, period. So the idea is make money and let them die. Mr. Pinker said he had rebutted the argument, citing research showing that high rates of infant mortality simply caused people to have more children. Mr. Epstein seemed annoyed, and a Harvard colleague later told Mr. Pinker that he had been voted off the island and no longer was welcome at Mr. Epstein's gathering. So by his account, it's basically Epstein was a mad eugenicist who was for population control, and I challenged him on that idea, not even by saying, hey, the world's a very big place and it has plenty of resources and enough resources for everybody. We work together instead of working towards scarcity for profits. We'd be great. But, he rolled with that one. Then there was Mr. Epstein's interest in eugenics. And you know how they say that afterwards? Again, population control is eugenics. Okay? On multiple occasions, starting in the early 2000s, Epstein told scientists and businessmen about his ambitions to use his New Mexico ranch as a base where women would be inseminated with his sperm and would give birth to his babies, according to 2 award-winning scientists and an advisor to large companies and wealthy individuals, all of whom Mr. Epstein told about it. So here we go. Here's where it gets wacky, guys. Let's handpick some women and let's knock them up all at the same exact time, 20 apiece. Who knows how many rounds, right? You figure he'll have like the scientist ones, and then he'll have, the ones off the street, and then he'll have the Asian ones and the ones, of African descent. Who knows? I have no idea what his plans were, but it sounds like something out of a B-movie knockoff Bond film from the early 70s or late 60s. That's what this reminds me of, something wacky like that. It was not a secret. The advisor, for example, said that he told about the plans not only by Mr. Epstein at a gathering at his Manhattan townhouse, but also by at least one prominent member of the business community. One of the scientists said Mr. Epstein divulged his idea in 2001 at a dinner at the same townhouse. The other recalled Epstein discussing it with him in a 2006 conference that he hosted at St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands. The idea struck all 3 as far-fetched and disturbing. Really? Just a little far-fetched and a little disturbing? There is no indication that it would have been against the law, and especially if it was down in, he wanted to do it in New Mexico, but imagine he decided to do it over at Little St. James, or maybe he was planning to do it at Greater St. James. That's why he bought the place. Once at a dinner at Mr. Epstein's mansion on Manhattan's Upper East Side, Mr. Lanier, and this is the VR guy, said he talked to a scientist who told him that Mr. Epstein's goal was to have 20 women at a time impregnated at his 33,000 square foot Zorro Ranch in a tiny townhouse outside of Santa Fe. Mr. Lanier said the scientist identified herself as working at NASA, but did not remember her name. According to Mr. Lanier, the NASA scientist said Mr. Epstein had based his idea for a baby ranch on accounts of the repository for germinal choice, which was to be stocked with his sperm, with the sperm of Nobel laureates who wanted to strengthen the human gene pool. Only one Nobel Prize winner has acknowledged contributing sperm to it. The repository supposedly disclosed operations in '99. Lanier, the virtual reality creator and author, said he had the impression that Mr. Epstein was using the dinner parties where some guests were attractive women with impressive academic credentials. Remember, I talked about this, scouting beautiful, smart women to screen candidates to bear Mr. Epstein's children. That's how wacky this is. Mr. Epstein did not hide his interest in tinkering with genes and in perpetuating his own DNA. One adherent of transhumanism said that he and Mr. Epstein discussed the financier's interest in cryogenics, an unproven science in which people's bodies are frozen to be brought back to life in the future. Mr. Epstein told the person that he wanted his head and penis to be frozen. Yes, the notorious egg-shaped penis on the rocks with his head. You think as a billionaire, you might just want to go full board and just have the whole thing frozen, the whole shebango, right? Do you really want to lop off your kibbles and bits? I don't know. Sounds even wackier than wacky. Southern Trust Company, Mr. Epstein's Virgin Island Incorporated business, disclosed in a local filing that it was engaged in DNA analysis. Calls to Southern Trust, which sponsored a science and math fair for school children in the Virgin Islands in 2014, were not returned. Shocking. In 2011, a charity established by Mr. Epstein gave $20,000 to the Worldwide Transhumanist Association. Weird. Oh man, I did a walk and talk today on transhumanism. Go check that out because I don't want to go over it again. If you want to hear how I feel about transhumanism, please go check that out. Which now operates under the name Humanity Plus. Oh. The group's website says their goal is to deeply influence a new generation of thinkers who dare to envision humanity's next steps. Mr. Epstein's foundation, which is now defunct, also gave $100,000 to pay the salary of Ben Goertzel, vice chairman of Humanity Plus, according to Mr. Goertzel's resume. So $20,000 here, $100,000 there. You want to know about transhumanism and Goertzel? Why don't you go check out the Twitter feed of TruthStream Media? Go check out their work. They'll let you know. They'll let you know all about transhumanism. I have no desire to talk about Epstein right now, Mr. Goertzel said in an email to the New York Times. The stuff I'm reading about him in the papers is pretty disturbing, and goes way beyond what I thought his misdoings and kinks were. Yuck. Oh, really? Give me a break. Give me a break. You know damn well who the monsters are. You're not stupid. You got a $100K salary. You're working in transhumanism and artificial intelligence. You're a smart guy. You know you've signed on with the devil. Don't act like you don't. Alan Dershowitz, a professor emeritus of the law at Harvard, recalled that a lunch. By the way, thank you for the super chat, my friend. Someone in Missouri. Sorry about that, guys. Let's see. He says that he hosted in Cambridge, Mass. He steered the conversation toward the question of how humans could be improved genetically. Mr. Dershowitz said he was appalled given the Nazis' use of eugenics to justify their genocidal efforts to purify the Aryan race. Come on, Dershowitz, you grandstanding liar. Yet the lunches persisted. Thank you, New York Times. Of course the lunches persisted. Everyone speculated about whether these scientists were more interested in the views or more interested in his money, Mr. Dershowitz, who was one of Mr. Epstein's defense lawyers, said. Luminaries at Mr. Epstein's St. Thomas conference in 2006, including Mr. Hawking and Caltech theoretical physicist Kip S. Thorne, one participant at that conference, which was ostensibly on the subject of gravity, recalled that Mr. Epstein wanted to talk about perfecting the human genome. Mr. Epstein said that he was fascinated with how current traits were passed on and how that could result in superior humans. I'm telling you, tree of life. Mr. Epstein appears to have gained entry into the scientific community through John Brockman, a literary agent whose best-selling science writers include Richard Dawkins, Daniel Goleman, and Jared Diamond. Mr. Brockman did not respond to requests for comment, obviously. For 2 decades, Brockman presided over a series of salons that matched his scientific authors with potential benefactors. Oh. The so-called billionaire dinners apparently became a model for gatherings at Mr. Epstein's East 71st Street townhouse, which included some of the same guests. Oh, really? So they're talking about the mansion. They're talking about these New York meetings, and these salons are basically recruitment centers for these scientists so they can try to get money from Epstein and other donors. In 2004, Brockman hosted a dinner at the Indian Summer Restaurant in Monterey, California, where Epstein was introduced to scientists, including Seth Lloyd, the MIT physicist. Mr. Lloyd said that he found Mr. Epstein to be charming and to have interesting ideas, and although they turned out to be quite vague. Also at the Indian Summer Dinner, according to an account on the website of Mr. Brockman's Edge Foundation, were the Google founders, Sergey Brin and Larry Page. Oh yeah, and Jeff Bezos, accompanied by his mommy. Yeah, you see how it works? Epstein's been around these big players for a long time. A long time. Big-time globalist, intelligence connections everywhere, not only alleged molester of many of these children, but, he peddled them out. He trafficked them out to his buddies, and then some of them do go on to some interesting things. And he has all these really pretty connections. Like it said, was he screening these women to be potential, mothers to his children, or was he screening them for his intelligence assets? It's a good question. All the good-looking women were sitting with the physicist table. Daniel Dubno, who was a CBS producer at the time and attended the dinner, was quoted as saying, Mr. Dubno told the Times that he did not recall the dinner or having said those words. Bet he didn't. Thank you for the super chat. Truly great work, Jason. Together we can expose the truth. I am quite sure. We're exposing it every day, baby. We're exposing every day. And before I finish up this article, we're almost wrapping it up. I want to let people know I'm doing this with your support. I have a GoFundMe, $5, $10, $15. Anything you can give, it really helps me. That's how we're doing 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 videos a day. And if you can't do that and you're new to the channel and you like this information, you like these deep dives, you like me making these connections, showing you how it works, please subscribe, ring that bell. Right up here, baby. Just ring that bell and subscribe, and we're doing all these videos. And you know what? Star it. Star the channel. Just come back every day. We're doing all sorts of stuff here, so check that out. All right, let's wrap up this article with Epstein, okay? Mr. Brockman, who is Mr. Gelman's agent, and Mr. Gelman, in the acknowledgement section of his 1995 book, The Quark and the Jaguar, thanked Mr. Epstein for his financial support. So again, pre-90s. In the 80s, he had connections to Adnan Khashoggi, connections to arms dealers, connections to intelligence assets, traffickers of women, spies. I mean, this guy's got it all. Globalists, What more could you ask for? Scientists everywhere that he apparently collected, high-profile lawyers like Dershowitz. However impressive his roster of scientific contacts, Mr. Epstein could not resist embellishing it. He claimed on one of his websites to have the privilege of sponsoring many prominent scientists, including Mr. Pinker, Mr. Thorne, and the MIT mathematician and geneticist Eric S. Lander. Pinker said he had never taken any financial or other support from Mr. Epstein. Needless to say, I find Epstein's behavior reprehensible. Now, here's the thing. Remember, he created shell companies and corporations to give to other places that didn't have his names on them. So there might be a lot of donations we still don't know about from Epstein. I'm not saying he's not a liar. I'm just saying that's a possibility. Mr. Thorne, who recently won a Nobel Prize, said he attended Mr. Epstein's 2006 conference, believing to be co-sponsored by a reputable research center. Other than that, I have no contact with a relationship with affiliation or funding from Epstein. He said, I unequivocally condemn his abhorrent actions involving minors. McGuire basically says the same thing, that he had no relationship, etc., etc. But again, those shell companies and corporations. So guys, I think that's going to do it for this video. I've got a ton of documents to now go through on Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein, Virginia Roberts Guthrie. I'm going to try to hit up maybe one or two more videos, maybe a deep dive later today. So again, if you're new to this channel and you want to see the real documents and where you can get them and how you can search them and where the real information is, think about subscribing, sharing this with your friends, putting it on blogs, sharing it in emails, any way you can. The Twitter, the Facebook. I don't know what else the kids are using, but those are my main tools, even though I'm not on the Facebook a lot because I can't stand the platform. That being said, guys, I will see you all on the flip, and thank you so much.